The morning of October 15th, 2016, started like any other Saturday for James Walker. The 34-year-old software engineer from Portland, Oregon, had been planning this road trip for months, a solo journey across the Pacific Northwest to clear his head after a difficult divorce. His silver 2014 Honda Accord was packed with camping gear, his laptop, and enough supplies for what he told friends would be a week-long digital detox. James had always been methodical, the type of person who planned every detail. So when he kissed his sister Rachel goodbye that morning and promised to check in every few days, she had no reason to worry. Before we continue with James's story, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we bring these mysterious cases to light. James's first planned stop was Mount Hood National Forest, about 90 minutes east of Portland. Security cameras at a gas station in Gresham captured him filling up his tank at 11:47 a.m., looking relaxed and even chatting briefly with the attendant about the beautiful fall weather. The footage shows him purchasing a coffee and a bag of trail mix, the same brands he'd been buying for years during his weekend hiking trips. What the cameras couldn't capture was the sense of freedom James felt as he drove away from the complexities of his recent life changes. His route was well documented through his meticulous planning. James had researched every campground, hiking trail, and scenic viewpoint along Highway 26. His phone's GPS history, later recovered by investigators, showed he'd saved dozens of locations stretching from Mount Hood toward Central Oregon. Friends described James as someone who found peace in nature, particularly after the stress of his divorce proceedings had consumed much of the previous year. The road trip wasn't just recreation, it was his way of reconnecting with himself. The last confirmed sighting of James came from a trail ranger at Trillium Lake, who remembered speaking with him around 3:30 p.m. that same day. The ranger, Marcus Fleming, later told investigators that James had asked about less crowded camping spots and mentioned wanting to disappear from the world for a while. Fleming found the comment unremarkable at the time. Many visitors expressed similar sentiments about escaping city life. James appeared in good spirits, well prepared for camping, and showed no signs of distress or unusual behavior. What made James's disappearance particularly puzzling was his consistent communication pattern. Throughout his adult life, he'd never gone more than 48 hours without contacting family or close friends, even during his most intensive work projects. His sister Rachel knew something was wrong when Sunday evening arrived without the promised check-in call. By Monday morning, when James failed to show up for a scheduled work presentation that he'd spent weeks preparing, Rachel contacted the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office to file a missing person report. Detective Lisa Hammond was assigned as the lead investigator on James's case. With 15 years of experience in missing persons cases, she immediately noticed several factors that set this disappearance apart from typical hiking accidents or voluntary disappearances. James's bank accounts showed no activity after his gas station purchase in Gresham. His credit cards remained unused. Most significantly, his cell phone had gone silent after 4:15 p.m. on October 15th. With the last ping coming from a cell tower near government camp. The investigation revealed that James had been dealing with significant personal stress beyond his divorce. Co-workers at the software development company, where he'd worked for 8 years, described him as increasingly withdrawn in the months before his disappearance. While his work performance remained excellent, several colleagues noted that James had become more solitary, often eating lunch alone and declining invitations to after-work social gatherings. His ex-wife, Jennifer, told investigators that James had been struggling with feelings of failure and uncertainty about his future, though she emphasized that he'd never expressed any thoughts of self-harm. Financial records painted a picture of a man trying to rebuild his life. James had recently moved into a smaller apartment after selling the house he'd shared with Jennifer. He'd been making regular payments on his car loan, maintaining his health insurance, and had even started contributing to a new retirement account. All indicators of someone planning for the future rather than someone contemplating disappearing permanently. His sister Rachel provided investigators with detailed information about James's mental state in the weeks before his trip, describing him as sad but hopeful, looking forward to the camping trip as a chance to gain perspective on his new circumstances. The initial search efforts were hampered by the vast wilderness area James could have accessed. Mount Hood National Forest spans over 1 million acres, with countless trails, camping areas, and remote locations where someone could easily become lost or injured. Search and rescue teams focused their efforts along James's planned route, using helicopters, tracking dogs, and volunteer searchers to comb through the most likely areas. The search expanded to include neighboring counties and even extended into Washington state, as investigators considered the possibility that James had deviated from his planned itinerary. The case attracted significant media attention throughout Oregon and Washington, partly due to James's middle-class background and the mysterious circumstances of his vanishing. Local news stations featured his story regularly during the first 6 months, and his photograph was distributed to outdoor recreation businesses, campgrounds, and ranger stations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Despite the publicity and ongoing investigative efforts, no credible sightings or new evidence emerged. James Walker had seemingly vanished without a trace in one of the most heavily trafficked recreational areas in Oregon. Months turned into years as Detective Hammond and James's family continued searching for answers. The file remained active, and new tips were investigated whenever they came in, but the trail had gone completely cold. Seasonal searches were conducted each spring and summer, focusing on areas that became accessible only after winter snows melted. Professional search teams were joined by volunteers from hiking clubs and outdoor enthusiasts who had followed the case and wanted to help bring closure to James's family. The case generated numerous theories among law enforcement and the public. Some investigators believed James had suffered an accident in a remote area where his remains might never be found. Others considered the possibility of foul play, though no evidence supported this theory. A few suggested that James might have chosen to disappear voluntarily, though his family and friends insisted this was completely out of character. The lack of any financial activity or confirmed sightings in the years following his disappearance made all theories equally plausible and equally unverifiable. As time passed, James's disappearance became one of those haunting mysteries that occasionally resurface in true crime forums and missing persons databases. His sister Rachel never stopped advocating for continued investigation, organizing anniversary searches, and maintaining a social media presence to keep his case in the public eye. She established a reward fund that grew to over $25,000 for information leading to James's whereabouts or the discovery of his remains. The reward generated hundreds of tips over the years, but none led to any breakthrough in the case. The breakthrough came on a scorching hot afternoon in July 2023. Nearly 7 years after James Walker had disappeared. A group of geology students from Oregon State University was conducting field research in a remote canyon area approximately 40 miles southeast of where James was last seen. The location, accessible only by a rough dirt road that most recreational vehicles couldn't navigate, had been outside the original search perimeter. Dr. Amanda Chen, the professor leading the expedition, was documenting rock formations when one of her students called out about something metallic glinting in the afternoon sun. Hidden beneath years of accumulated debris, fallen branches, and invasive blackberry vines was the distinctive silver Honda Accord that had vanished with James Walker. The car's license plate, though faded and partially obscured by rust, was unmistakably registered to the missing man. The vehicle sat in what appeared to be a natural depression, almost perfectly concealed from overhead view by the canyon's steep walls and dense vegetation. It was as if the forest had deliberately swallowed the car, keeping it hidden from countless search flights and ground teams that had combed the region in the years following James's disappearance. The discovery site presented investigators with more questions than answers. The location was at least 15 miles from any established campground or hiking trail, accessible only through a series of increasingly treacherous logging roads that hadn't appeared on any of the maps James had been carrying. How he'd ended up in such a remote area remained a complete mystery, especially given his reputation for careful planning and his unfamiliarity with the region's more obscure back roads. Detective Hammond, now a sergeant but still deeply invested in James's case, arrived at the scene within hours of the discovery. What she found defied many of the assumptions investigators had developed over the years. The Honda Accord was in remarkably good condition, considering its 7-year exposure to the elements. While the exterior showed expected signs of weathering, rust spots, faded paint, and accumulated organic debris, the structural integrity remained largely intact. More surprising was the condition of the interior, which had been protected by the car's sealed windows and appeared almost frozen in time. Inside the vehicle, investigators found James's camping equipment exactly as he would have packed it for a weekend trip. His sleeping bag, hiking boots, and portable camping stove were neatly organized in the back seat and trunk. His laptop bag sat in the front passenger seat, though the computer itself had suffered water damage from years of humidity. Most intriguingly, his wallet was still in the glove compartment, containing his driver's license, credit cards, and $120 in cash, ruling out robbery as a motive for his disappearance. The car's position and condition suggested it hadn't crashed or been abandoned in distress. The vehicle sat upright and stable, with no visible damage to indicate an accident or mechanical failure. The keys were missing, and there was no sign of forced entry or struggle. It appeared that James had deliberately driven to this remote location and then simply walked away from his car, taking nothing with him except possibly the clothes he was wearing. Forensic examination of the vehicle revealed few additional clues about James's final hours. The fuel tank was nearly empty, suggesting he'd driven a considerable distance after his last confirmed sighting. Tire tracks around the car had long since been obliterated by weather and vegetation growth, making it impossible to determine the exact route James had taken to reach the canyon. Most frustratingly, the car's interior showed no signs of struggle, blood, or any other evidence that might explain what had happened to its owner. The discovery reignited public interest in James Walker's disappearance, but it also deepened the mystery surrounding his fate. News crews returned to the area, broadcasting live reports from the remote canyon where his car had been found. True crime podcasters and amateur investigators began developing new theories about what might have driven James to such an isolated location and what had happened to him after he'd left his vehicle behind. Detective Hammond organized a comprehensive search of the area surrounding the car, employing many of the same techniques that had been used in the original investigation 7 years earlier. Search and rescue teams combed through the rugged terrain, looking for any trace of James or clues about his final journey. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search for remains, while investigators used ground-penetrating radar and other advanced technology to examine areas where a body might have been concealed by natural processes or deliberately buried. The renewed search efforts lasted for 3 weeks and covered nearly 50 square miles of some of Oregon's most challenging wilderness terrain. Volunteers joined professional search teams, creating human chains to systematically examine every ravine, creek bed, and dense thicket within a reasonable walking distance of James's abandoned car. Despite their thoroughness and the advanced technology at their disposal, searchers found no trace of James Walker, no clothing, no camping gear, no human remains, nothing that could provide definitive answers about his disappearance. The investigation took an unexpected turn when forensic computer specialists managed to recover partial data from James's water-damaged laptop. Despite years of exposure to humidity and temperature fluctuations, portions of the hard drive were still readable. The recovered files included internet browsing history from the days before his disappearance, revealing a pattern of searches that shed new light on his mental state and possible intentions. In the week before his camping trip, James had spent considerable time researching remote areas of Oregon's wilderness, but his searches had focused specifically on locations known for their isolation rather than their recreational opportunities. He'd visited websites about off-grid living, wilderness survival techniques, and legal requirements for property ownership in rural areas. Most concerning were his searches for information about disappearing voluntarily and starting a new life without leaving traces for authorities or family members to follow. The computer evidence painted a picture of a man who might have been planning something far more permanent than a weekend camping trip. While James had never explicitly expressed suicidal thoughts to family or friends, the combination of his personal struggles, his methodical research into remote locations, and his subsequent disappearance suggested that his trip into the wilderness might have been a carefully planned exit from his previous life. Whether that exit was intended to be temporary or permanent remained unclear. Jennifer Walker, James's ex-wife, was deeply shaken by the computer discoveries. She told investigators that while their marriage had ended, she'd never believed James capable of simply vanishing without explanation. The evidence suggested a level of premeditation that seemed inconsistent with the man she'd known for over a decade. However, she acknowledged that the divorce proceedings and his struggles with starting over had affected James more deeply than she'd realized at the time. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a forensic anthropologist consulted on the case, explained to investigators that 7 years in the Oregon wilderness could completely erase most physical evidence of human remains. Wild animals, weather, and natural decomposition processes could scatter or eliminate bones and other materials, especially in the acidic soil conditions common to old-growth forest areas. The discovery of James's car had provided crucial evidence about his final known location, but it couldn't reveal what had happened to him after he'd walked away from the vehicle. The case file grew thicker with new evidence and witness statements, but Detective Hammond found herself no closer to definitive answers about James Walker's fate. The discovery of his car had eliminated some possibilities while raising entirely new questions. Had James driven to the remote canyon intending to harm himself? Had he planned to disappear permanently and start a new life elsewhere? Or had something unexpected happened to him after he'd abandoned his vehicle in that isolated location? Interviews with James's co-workers revealed additional details about his state of mind in the months before his disappearance. Several colleagues mentioned that James had spoken about feeling trapped by societal expectations and the pressure to rebuild his life according to conventional standards. He'd expressed frustration with the dating scene and the prospect of starting over professionally and personally. Some remembered him making offhand comments about wondering what it would be like to just walk away from everything and start fresh somewhere completely different. 3 months after the car's discovery, a retired forest ranger named Thomas Barrett contacted investigators with information that would provide crucial insights into James Walker's final journey. Barrett, who had worked in the Mount Hood National Forest System for over 30 years before retiring in 2019, had been following news coverage of the case and recognized the location where James's car was found. The canyon area, Barrett explained, was part of a network of abandoned logging roads and forgotten mining claims that had been largely inaccessible to the public for decades. Barrett's knowledge of the area's history proved crucial to understanding how James might have ended up in such a remote location. In the 1980s and 1990s, the canyon had been used as an unofficial dumping ground for old vehicles and machinery by local logging companies. While environmental cleanup efforts in the early 2000s had removed most of the debris, the access roads had never been properly closed or marked. A person familiar with the area's logging history might know how to reach the canyon, but it would be nearly impossible for a casual visitor to find by accident. The ranger's information led investigators to interview retired logging workers and long-time residents of nearby communities. Their inquiries eventually led them to Frank Morrison, a 67-year-old former logger who had been battling cancer and living alone in a cabin approximately 8 miles from where James's car was discovered. Morrison had been reluctant to speak with authorities, but as his health declined, he decided to share what he knew about the missing man. On the evening of October 15, 2016, Morrison had been driving home from a medical appointment when he encountered a disoriented man walking along one of the old logging roads. The man, whom Morrison now believed was James Walker, based on photographs shown to him by investigators, appeared confused and upset. He told Morrison that his car had broken down and asked for directions to the nearest town. Morrison, concerned about the man's obvious distress and the approaching darkness, offered to drive him to safety. During the 20-minute drive to a gas station in a small community near Highway 26, the man Morrison now identified as James had spoken about feeling completely lost in life and unsure how to move forward. He mentioned recent divorce, job stress, and an overwhelming sense that he'd failed at everything important to him. Morrison, who had experienced his own struggles with depression following his wife's death several years earlier, tried to offer encouragement and perspective. At the gas station, Morrison had offered to help James retrieve his car or contact a tow service, but James declined any further assistance. He thanked Morrison for the ride, purchased a bus ticket to Portland from a Greyhound counter inside the station, and disappeared into the small crowd of evening travelers. Morrison assumed James would return for his car once he'd resolved whatever personal crisis he was experiencing. When weeks passed without any sign of the vehicle's owner, Morrison figured it had been abandoned and would eventually be discovered by Forest Service personnel. Morrison's account explained how James had gotten so far from established camping areas and why his car had remained hidden for 7 years. More importantly, it provided the first concrete evidence that James had survived his time in the wilderness and made it to safety. Phone records from the gas station confirmed that a bus ticket to Portland had been purchased with cash on the evening of October 15, 2016, though the buyer's identity couldn't be verified after so many years. The revelation that James Walker might have survived his disappearance and deliberately chosen to vanish opened entirely new avenues of investigation. Detective Hammond began working with authorities in other states to search for any records of James using his real identity or attempting to establish a new one. Social Security Administration databases, employment records, and housing registrations were cross-referenced in hopes of finding some trace of his activities in the years following his disappearance. The search proved frustratingly difficult. If James had indeed chosen to disappear permanently, he had done so with the same methodical planning he'd applied to other aspects of his life. No records could be found of him using his Social Security number, applying for work under his real name, or accessing any of his previous financial accounts. Either he had successfully created a new identity, was living entirely off the grid, or had died sometime after Morrison had dropped him off at the gas station. James's family was torn between relief and anguish at the possibility that he might still be alive. His sister Rachel told reporters that knowing James had survived the wilderness gave her hope, but the realization that he had chosen to abandon his family without explanation was almost more painful than believing he had died accidentally. She made public appeals through media outlets, asking James to make contact and assuring him that his family's love was unconditional, regardless of the choices he had made. The investigation expanded to include examination of surveillance footage from the bus station and interviews with Greyhound employees who might have remembered James from that October evening. Unfortunately, the company's policy of retaining security footage for only 90 days meant that any visual evidence of James's departure had long since been deleted. Employee turnover in the intervening years made it unlikely that anyone would remember a single passenger from 7 years earlier. Private investigators hired by James's family pursued additional leads, including checking homeless shelters, temporary employment agencies, and cash-based job markets in cities throughout the western United States. They theorized that someone trying to live off the grid might gravitate toward agricultural work, construction jobs, or other employment that didn't require extensive background checks or documentation. Despite their efforts and significant financial investment, no credible leads emerged. The case officially remained open, but active investigation efforts gradually wound down as leads were exhausted and years passed without any confirmed sightings or new evidence. James Walker's story became a cautionary tale about the pressures of modern life and the lengths to which people might go to escape overwhelming circumstances. His disappearance highlighted the challenges facing law enforcement when investigating cases involving adults who may have chosen to vanish voluntarily. Detective Hammond, now preparing for retirement, reflected on the case that had consumed so much of her career. She maintained contact with James's sister Rachel, providing updates whenever new information emerged and offering support during the difficult anniversaries of his disappearance. The discovery of James's car had answered some questions while raising many others, but it had also provided the family with the first concrete evidence of what had happened during his final known day. 7 years after his car was discovered, and 14 years after James Walker first vanished on that October afternoon, his fate remains unknown. The methodical software engineer who had planned every detail of his life had managed to execute the ultimate disappearing act, leaving behind only questions and the haunting possibility that sometimes people truly can vanish without a trace. Whether James found the peace he was seeking or met some tragic end after walking away from Frank Morrison remains one of Oregon's most enduring mysteries. The empty canyon, where James's Honda Accord waited for 7 years, has returned to its natural quiet, but the questions it raised continue to echo through the families and communities touched by his disappearance. Rachel Walker continues to maintain a social media presence dedicated to her brother's case, sharing his photograph and story with new audiences who might hold the key to solving the mystery. She has established a non-profit organization that provides support to families of missing persons, channeling her grief into helping others navigate similar tragedies. Recent developments in genealogical DNA testing and facial recognition technology have given investigators new tools to search for missing persons, even those who might be living under assumed identities. Detective Hammond's successor has submitted James's DNA profile to databases that might identify him if he's ever arrested, hospitalized, or encounters law enforcement under any circumstances. These technological advances offer new hope for resolving cold cases like James's, though they also raise questions about privacy and the right to remain missing. In a world where privacy has become increasingly rare, James Walker achieved what many consider impossible. He simply vanished, leaving behind only the ghost of a life interrupted and the enduring mystery of a man who walked away from everything familiar and never looked back. His story serves as a reminder that even in our connected digital age, it's still possible for someone to disappear completely if they possess the determination and planning skills to do so. Whether James Walker is alive somewhere, living under a new identity, and finally at peace with his choices, or whether his story ended tragically in the Oregon wilderness, may never be known. His disappearance remains a testament to the complexity of human desperation and the lengths to which someone might go to escape a life that has become unbearable.